So there's been quite a lot going on over the last several weeks politically. I mean, the major headline grabber has been Iran and the American strikes alongside Israeli attacks on Tehran and other oil related and military related targets throughout the Iranian plateau and nation state. So that's been interesting. I got to admit, back when the Trump administration ended up capturing Maduro and basically launching a surprise strike into Venezuela, I expected things to go more sideways. I'm actually a little bit impressed that things have gone as relatively smoothly and, unconsequentially or inconsequentially as they have since those strikes were launched. I kind of figured that it would create a power vacuum in Venezuela and that there would be a major destabilization that would take a while to kind of recover from. And then there was a decent chance that the United States would need to get more involved before it could detach and focus on something else. But that has not appeared to be the case. So it seems like we really did. We removed their leader, and it seems to have put the proverbial fear of God into the successor to Maduro, and they seem to more or less be cooperating, at least as far as the public is aware and concerned. So you have this scenario where in Venezuela went, I don't know, surprisingly smoothly, I suppose, is I guess the best way to put it from the American government's perspective. And apparently they decided it was worth trying again. And I don't know if this is directly about upholding the petrodollar, if this is about access to oil, even though the United States and Canada have a ton of that. I don't know exactly what this is about. It's probably a variety of factors. There's probably an element of all of this stuff that is just about distracting and keeping attention away from the Epstein files, right? Like, it wouldn't surprise me if there's a variety of reasons why the Trump administration felt like this was necessary to attack Iran. But for one reason or another, or whatever combination thereof, whether it was just it's very important to Israel, whether it was more related to things that they can't tell us, like, oh my gosh, like Iran is actually getting close to having a nuclear weapon. We need to strike now, and maybe years from now we'll find out. Maybe there's actually some decent reasons. I have no idea, right? I don't know that any of us do. I'm certainly not claiming to know more than what we've been presented in the media and on social media. All that said, it certainly looks like this was an unforced error and kind of a cluster that the Trump administration walked into without any real need to, and kind of gave themselves and America by extension something of a self-inflicted wound, because the destabilization that I kind of expected in Venezuela as fallout, while it didn't, at least as of yet, has not happened there. Iran was apparently the bridge too far, and they are. It's not destabilized in the sense that there's a massive power vacuum. It was actually a potentially worst case scenario where the United States is still iced out of any kind of positive contact with their government because they had a clear line of succession. And it seems like the Khamenei, however his last name is pronounced, the Ayatollah, his son that took his place and is now Ayatollah, is arguably or apparently more ideological, more religiously driven, and less like long-term focused on peace than even his father was. And it looks like there's a really good chance we're going to have a fairly drawn-out conflict on our hands. And now you're starting to hear anecdotally and through social media and whatnot, reports of potential mobilization of actual troops and a true land invasion of Iran. And my immediate thought process would be, why? What are we doing? Like, we just effectively grabbed Venezuela by the balls, and they're the largest, or the nation with the largest confirmed oil reserves on the planet. The United States and Canada have metric tons of the stuff, depending on the type of oil we're talking about, underneath its land, and that we have direct access to. We're also effectively propping up, and have been for decades, the Saudi royal family, and so have effectively guaranteed access to that, plus our various NATO allies like Norway, that's a major oil producer, So why go out of our way to take Iran, even though it does have major oil reserves? I'm not entirely sure. I suspect it's a lot more than that. Like oil is probably a piece of the puzzle, but I doubt that it's all of it. Very sincerely, it's probably far more driven by Israel's, and specifically their leader Netanyahu, and his desire to make sure that Iran emerges, or Iran loses its status and Israel emerges as a major power in the region. And I think there's probably a combo of factors, like Iran has been growing out their network of diplomatic influence, of with groups, funding and whatnot, and training and general support for groups that most of the West and Israel would consider terrorist groups. And so Israel's in a weird kind of front foot situation where it's moving forward. It's been attacking Gaza, arguably committing a friggin' genocide over there. Like, everybody in the West or in the United States that I'm aware of felt bad for Israel when many of its civilians were attacked and killed and taken hostage back in October, I believe it was, of pretty sure it was 2023, but or 2024, whichever it was, right? But now what they've done since then, I think, is pretty egregious and definitely did not meet the crime, and really shows that Netanyahu really seems to have he was chopping at the bit, waiting for an excuse, and it's entirely possible that that whole attack on Israel was allowed in the first place. It wouldn't surprise me at all, in the same way that Trump's ear seems to have regrown like perfectly without any notable scar tissue, even after getting hit by a sniper round, apparently. So, not to delve into conspiracy territory, but there's definitely stuff there. I think I don't trust our government. I don't trust this administration. I don't trust really any administration, but I think I trust this one the least. Trump is dangerous. His people are dangerous. The sycophants that he has in power and that he has throughout his administration are extremely collectively the right mix of overconfident and incompetent, it seems, based on what we're seeing so far. And it's creating a real just smoke show of problems for our nation that we're probably going to be diplomatically cleaning up for the foreseeable future. And depending on who we vote into office hereafter for a while, it may not go away. This may, in some respects, be a new reality for America and Americans and the reputation of our nation abroad. I was hoping that Biden would represent something better for our country and better to other nations around the world. And I really did believe in a lot of what he was wanting to put forward. I think things like the CHIPS Act and the Recovery Act or Inflation Reduction Act, etc., whatever they were, there was 2 or 3 of them that were put forward and passed during Biden's early years. And I think a lot of those were heading in the right direction. In fact, if anything, I don't think they went far enough. Right? But Biden just, in the end, ended up being wildly disappointing. And that's how I felt about politics for a while now, that the best we can get from Democrats is disappointing and underwhelming. And Republicans continuously seem to just, particularly Trump, are just roughshod, running over the rules and regulations and the ways of doing business and the things that have traditionally kept presidents from acting out of hand and so on. And Trump and his people really don't seem to care. And it's interesting because most Republicans in Congress seemingly have no interest in holding him back, and the Supreme Court is all but designed not to actually hold Trump back or hold him accountable. So we're seeing very, very little real pushback. And then with the Democrats, especially with leadership like Chuck Schumer, they're not only not doing anything, their strategy is to collectively sit back and watch the show because Americans, we voted this in. Like, we chose this. And my understanding is that's how a lot of Democratic politicians feel, is wait until the midterms, wait until 2028, stand up, in small ways and in ways that are showy or in capacities that make us look good while without really having to do all that much, but in practice very, very little resistance in any kind of real way. And I'm not entirely sure that the United States really knows or has much of a tradition of really standing up to our government in the way that we maybe did 150 years ago. And in some respects I think that's good. I think, like, in the 1960s when we had a lot of problems, I'm glad we were able to work that out diplomatically and politically and eventually progress, and get our civil rights and voting rights acts and whatnot passed without having a huge amount of civil strife, right? I'm glad that during the Great Depression and the progressive era before it in the early 1900s that we were able to solve these things diplomatically and that we were able to vote in political change. I'm glad that we were able to do that. That said, the political and economic scenario that we find ourselves in now is a bit different, and I'm concerned that the levers that allow us to really institute political change are too stacked against us at this point. I think too many levers of power seem to have been stolen away from the American people, and I'm not even entirely sure what it would take to get to a place that we had a true political revolution. I'd like to say it stands with independent candidates, and your progressive types or your libertarian types, those that are really outside of the system and truly want to see change in some meaningful ways, having a new Teddy Roosevelt or Franklin Roosevelt or John F. Kennedy or even Lyndon Johnson, right? Somebody of that kind of nature, or a more pro-people version of Reagan that supports unions and empowering the working classes and so on, and the American family, right? Like, I would love to see that. I'm not entirely sure that the Overton window, the political reality that we're existing in right now, and the way that campaign finance works, I'm not sure that's realistic or truly possible at this point. I think it's been dangled in front of us for so long that many of us are starting to realize or understand that it is incredibly unlikely, if not impossible, for this to happen peacefully, which is deeply concerning to me. And it is interesting that we have, to loop back to the Iran situation, we have an administration and political infrastructure in this nation that, in the case of Trump, literally ran on no new wars, and my administration, in his words, will be measured not only by the wars we end, but by the wars we never start. And then proceeds to, in about a year after getting into office, attacking Venezuela, seemingly getting kind of lucky, or maybe handled it masterfully in that particular scenario. I don't know. I'm not privy to that kind of specialized information. But anyway, that led to Venezuela actually remaining pretty stable and just effectively switching power from one leader to another that then fell in line with American demands, and it actually went pretty easily for us. Iran is not that. Clearly, it's over here. I mean, they're lobbing a variety of missile barrages and strikes at Israel and our American bases and shipping infrastructure and all sorts of stuff all over the Gulf region, right? Whether it's the UAE, whether it's Kuwait, whether it's Bahrain, or what have you. Just any, apparently even military bases that we have in Iraq, right? So the United States is in an interesting position where now the Strait of Hormuz is effectively blocked, and Iran, we really gained nothing by switching out this leader, the Ayatollah, and any of the other leadership. We really don't have much to gain from even winning this war, right? Like, what are we in it for? What started this? What's the reason? There was no 9/11 that triggered this. There was no active aggression on Iran's part. They've been covert and subversive and just trying to survive in a world that the West effectively commands for decades, and doing it fairly successfully. And then after decades of Iran knowing exactly where our bases are and how our allies operate and how we operate and where a lot of our weak points are, we decided to go and just toss a rock at this particular glass house and then seem to have been surprised when they hit back after being able to watch us for decades and see exactly where they should hit us if they ever need to, and knowing that the United States was quite possibly going to do something like this at some point, and they didn't know how or when, but they were, they're a nation state that clearly was interested in their own self-defense. And I am by no means an Iranian apologist. I'm not a fan of their government. I have no real empathy, honestly, for the Ayatollah, given the number of people, their own people, that they have disappeared and tortured and arrested for ridiculous crimes, and the way that they've oppressed their people, in particular women. Um, I definitely am no friendly face in regards to the Iranian regime. That said, the United States is really demonstrating once again that, to use a Star Wars kind of analogy, we are the empire. Like, we are the problem. We are the big player, the 800-pound gorilla that's just throwing its weight around because we can. And every now and again, it seems like more regularly than I would like to see us get reminded, our military and diplomatic and economic power has its limits. We are not a world hegemon. We do not actually run this world the way that Trump seems to think we do. We are a major power, but we can also overextend ourselves rather easily, and that seems to be what we're doing now. And it seems to be another demonstration of a president giving in to a military-industrial complex that is way out of hand and out of touch with the will of the American people, and an economy and political structure that is far, far and away out of touch with what most of the American people would like to see. We apparently have the money to spend, $1 billion plus a day on a war with Iran that was entirely unnecessary, but we can't afford to expand Medicaid or food stamps or provide universal health care or any number of the other things that real advanced nations should be doing. We don't actually care about our working and middle class people, those that actually sustain this nation, that are the actual citizens of this nation. We show ourselves again and again, and that's the American government when I say we in this case. The American government shows over and over again it does ultimately not care about us. And it is in the business of serving its donors, serving its international interests, serving those that actually control the levers of power. And if there's been any doubt in anyone's mind that's watching this video whether or not the United States government really represents us or our interests or what we care about most, this war in Iran and just blatant disregard for anything Americans really should care about, including gas prices, right? They've gone up dramatically, right? And from an administration that swore to no new wars, right? This is ridiculous. It is patently absurd that this is the scenario that we're in, and yet it isn't absurd from the perspective of an American because we've lived this. In some respects, this is like a dumb repeat of the 20s, but with slightly less Dick Cheney, fortunately, I guess. Um, and we'll have to see how much this kind of chaos unfolds. For what it's worth, I am not wishing that this goes poorly for the United States. I still consider myself, a generally proud American citizen. I love what America represents. I love what the geography of this nation, the people of this nation. I think we can be so much more than this. We have the all of the means to do it, but right now all of those levers of power and means of change are controlled by those that have no interest whatsoever, as they're demonstrating over and over again, Democrat or Republican, honestly, in really fulfilling that and actually giving the American people what I believe we as a nation deserve. And so for that, I think we're going to need to fight for it. I sincerely hope we can do it peacefully and we can have a regime change in regards to the kind of thought, a new political era, like the New Deal that was ushered in after the Great Depression when FDR was voted in. And I bring it up over and over again because it is that pivotal of a moment. That was a moment when the United States rejected historical trends and showed the world how we can do things better. And now much of the Western world has actually taken much of those policies and ideas and ran with them, while since the 1970s, notably the 1980s and after the Reagan Revolution, as they call it, we rejected and went backwards. And that's where we're at now, 40 plus years later. So we can get back there. We can do it again. We can have a peaceful political revolution. And I think you have certain types, like your Bernie Sanders, that I don't know him personally, obviously, and I don't know how corrupt or, like straight up. My concern with Bernie, I love the guy. I love what he stands for. My concern with Bernie is he's been in for so long. I'm a little, I have my reservations about how clean can somebody of his nature really be. Like I really support there being term limits for senators. Bernie would be out. He would have been out of politics a long time ago. So while on the one hand, I love what he stands for, and I think he's a good reference point, we need to move beyond the Bernie Sanders candidates of the world. And I think we have you have like the squad like AOC and whatnot. I think they're learning. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has some potential, but even then, I think they focused a lot on kind of dumb social issues and pushing green reform and things that aren't necessarily as important to a lot of the American people as many of these Justice Democrats seem to think they were. And then you have like your Tea Party candidates and your libertarian types like Rand Paul, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of them have ended up getting sucked into the MAGA machine. There just isn't a whole lot of real independent thought left in the Republican Party, which is really disappointing to me. So on the one hand, you have like Democrats that are still very much controlled by neoliberal establishment types, and then on the right, you have what we call the right. The Republican Party has it's really controlled by nationalists, corporatist nationalists that are if definitely dangerous. And while yes, they represent change, so did the Nazis, and so did in Germany, right, in the 1930s. So did Mussolini and his actual fascist regime in Italy in the 1930s and 40s. So just change in and of itself, and I don't feel like I really even need to say this, but just for the sake of making sure we're all on the same page, change in and of itself is not inherently a good thing. We need to be careful about the kind of change we're voting for. I think Obama was a great example of the potential for change that didn't actually come to bear because it was watered down and diluted terribly by the neoliberal regime that Obama existed within. And I think the Trump 1.0, his first administration, was kind of like that as well. I think Trump actually, funnily enough, I actually like some of what Trump, quite a bit of what Trump stood for, especially the first time around, right? And what he seemed like he wanted to do, even though I felt like building a border wall, for example, and trying to get Mexico to pay for it was a ridiculous concept. I at least understood where he was coming from. This 2.0 second Trump administration is something else, man. Between ICE murdering people in Minneapolis and deporting people that should not be deported because they're in the process of seeking asylum, or any number of other underhanded techniques that ICE and Border Patrol is using, and the foreign policy that is really starting to hurt the American people, domestic policy that is cutting people off of Medicaid and food stamps and making the Affordable Care Act so watered down as to be almost useless, and causing everybody's healthcare costs to go up. Like, this is the best we're going to get is a slightly increased tax return, but it's going to get munched up. It already is for a lot of us in all the ways that the Trump administration is costing us. So if you're wealthy, then sure, it was worth voting Trump back into office. If you're not, like the vast majority of us aren't, it's just going to hurt us. And we're not even 2 years into this. We're not even a year and a half into this second administration for Trump. So buckle up, everybody. This is going to be an interesting ride. But I think I've rambled on enough today. So if you want to hear more about what's going on with the reality of our political moment and ways that we can start to stand against it, though, stick around because we're definitely going to be talking about it.